We're talking about playoffs in August? Yes, we are. We're talking about the playoffs in August before the season even starts. Because in best ball, that's where all the money is won. And I think it gets a little misconstrued how we should handle the playoffs. What kind of players do we target? How do we construct our teams to optimize for the playoffs? Maybe what games are more important for the playoffs? What types of players should we target to give ourselves the best shot at 2 million, 1 million, hundreds of thousands of dollars come January 1st in 2023 when the season wraps up? That is what we're going to talk about today. I don't know why, but the the Jim Mora playoff clip, maybe it's my age, my generation. That playoff clip will forever be one of the few sports quotes that I will absolutely never ever forget. And the picture of him, everything is just perfect. And it's perfect for what we're talking about today, too, with the best ball playoffs. I think the playoffs are something now. It's going to trigger me every time I say the word playoffs. Playoffs. the playoffs are something that gets a little, like, it's maybe misconstrued as to, what it even really means for these best ball tournaments. And it's a little bit difficult to kind of convey specifically what role the playoffs play in how we draft teams and, how we construct our entire portfolio, maybe how we rank players. And we'll get into kind of all of that today. The first thing is making sure that people really, truly understand. Like when I say that all the money is won in the playoffs, it's obviously a little bit of hyperbole because there is money not won in week 17. But on Underdog and on DraftKings, there's very little money that you care about not distributed in that final week. And so when people talk about, I'm playing to advance, I just want to get as many teams through, that thesis generally makes sense, right? You will hear someone say, not me, but you will hear someone say, I'm just trying to get as many teams into the playoffs, and then that's my way to get as many shots to see if I can make the finals. And while theoretically that might make logical sense when you say that out loud, the problem is that I don't specifically know what that mindset is doing differently than say I am, or probably anyone that is listening to this channel that is a little bit more focused on taking down the top prize and thus the playoffs. You might hear someone say, I draft a little bit more 3 quarterbacks or 3 tight ends, or maybe I draft a little more early running backs, right? Because I need those running back early season points. The problem and the counter to that is drafting more quarterbacks is drafting more of a position where you only start one, and it's a generally flatter and more projectable scoring with less injuries. And so all you're really doing is elevating your floor a little bit. And even then it has to the scores have to align, right? It's funny because the winner of Best Ball Mania 2 last year, Liam Murphy at Chess Liam, one with a 2-quarterback team that had Josh Allen and Justin Fields, which is both the epitome of this idea of raising your floor and advance rate with 3 quarterbacks being a little bit of a myth, because you saw, like, if you just have reasonable quarterback play, obviously Josh Allen was much more than reasonable. He was the quarterback one. If you have good quarterback play, the other guy doesn't matter. So now drafting 3, you say, well, I'm guaranteeing myself a little bit better shot at good quarterback play. But it's also more projectable. We generally know what we're going to get out of Tom Brady and what we were going to get out of Matthew Stafford last year, generally speaking. Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. We generally know what we're going to get out of those guys. And so attaching Kenny Pickett, attaching Ryan Tannehill, etc., onto that team, I'm not sure that it's helping your advance rate too much, and I also don't think it's necessarily helping in the playoffs. And that's because you can also help your advance rate with those extra skill players, running back, probably running back especially, but running back, wide receiver, both. Right? So instead of taking that 3rd quarterback in the 15th round or 16th round, you take another flyer that gives you another shot at a good skill player. And a good skill player can fit your spot, can fit your starting lineup, in multiple more spots than with the flex. And then obviously with 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs in your starting lineup, can fit your starting lineup at multiple more positions. What's more impactful, finding Eli Mitchell in the last round last year, taking James Conner in the 10th round, getting 3 or 4 spike weeks out of Alexander Mattison, getting Darrell Henderson before Cam Akers got hurt? Is that more impactful, or is, Zach Wilson? And I don't dislike Zach Wilson this year at all, but I don't think it's necessarily helping your advance rate. Then on the other side is tight end. Tight end is the lowest scoring position. And so I do take 3 tight end teams. I've written quite a bit about 3 tight end teams. But it's more so looking for different ways to leverage the field in tournaments. It's not necessarily looking for the advance rate. And so there's this idea that it has to be one or the other, with playoffs, focusing on playoffs and focusing on week 17 and focusing on upside, or focusing on advance rate and such. And then the final thing with that is you get the running back position. People might say, well, you can't take, I don't take 0 running back because it has lower advance rates, which I don't think is super true. Generally speaking, it's those types of advance rate conversations are going to fluctuate from year to year, and years old data is not very relevant to the current year. We don't need to get into all that, but there's a little bit of, issues in the sample that happens with those. But the other thing is that from an advancing perspective, one of the riskiest things you can do is actually to take a running back early, which sounds crazy, right? I need running backs. I need the early running back points. The running backs can be the game changers in tournaments. If you hit on Jonathan Taylor, if you hit on Christian McCaffrey, if you hit on old Le'Veon Bell, etc. If you hit on those guys, they're game changers in tournaments. But the problem is, to find them, you have to wade through 10, 20, 25 total running backs. And a lot of those guys are going to bust. The wide receivers, think to last year. Even Derrick Henry, bust because he got hurt, right? Christian McCaffrey, bust. Thinking out loud, Saquon, huge bust, right? These guys just get hurt at a frequent level, and they're so tied to their offensive situation that you can much more easily bust with them. The wide receivers, like CeeDee Lamb, was not very good, but it was certainly not worth a late 2nd round pick or a 2-3 turn pick given his production. But he was fine. He was putting up points for you all year. He had some spikes, and he was playing. all year round. It was really like just Allen Robinson, if you recall, like pretty much like just Allen Robinson that was like a stone bust at the wide receiver position early, and then Robert Woods got hurt, but that was still that was a 4th round pick as opposed to an early round pick. Zeke bust, right? So it's one of those things where I wanted to touch on this idea of the playoffs and being such a focus on the playoffs. Is that we don't have to forego any of the other stuff. No one is saying, don't draft a running back until the 14th round or whatever. No one is saying to do anything like truly that's harming your advance rate to a serious extent, right? You may hear me joke about taking 2 tight ends on the same bye, and technically that is hurting your advance rate. You're going to lose a couple of points probably, right? 5 to 10 points. But that's such small potatoes. And so this conversation about playoffs is really important because we can still make really well-structured teams that advance at a really high clip while maximizing our potential to win $2 million or $1 million, or like I said, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the playoffs, because we are focused on the right types of players, the right structure of teams, the right correlation. We'll get into contingent value and all those different things that should be the focus that can still be really high advancing teams. And I know that people have there's always a lot of questions about the advancing and conversations about advancing versus playoffs and all of that. And I think my answer to that is why I wanted to talk about this. It's like both. I am obviously focused on the playoffs, and I think everyone that's trying to win these tournaments should be focused on the playoffs, but that doesn't mean I'm not building teams that are set up to also advance. So now we've had the advance rate conversation. CJ says, I never draft 3 quarterbacks in tournaments, rarely on drafters if I have no elite. Yeah, I wouldn't say I never do, but it's very, very rare for me. I think it's probably like after a Justin Fields, maybe Tua or something like that. There's not a lot of guys that end as my quarterback one where I take 3, but it does happen. It does. Sometimes the draft just, it doesn't work out for you. You know what I mean? That does happen. Derek says, does the analysis change if you take all 3 QBs late? So the analysis will always kind of change depending upon when you take players. But the counter is that taking all 3 quarterbacks late is certainly not helping your advance rate. The advance rate stuff would say you need an elite quarterback. It's the projectable position. You don't want to. 3 late quarterbacks is still probably going to lose you points. It's definitely going to lose you upside, but it's not definitely, almost definitely, probably going to lose you upside on a weekly basis at the position, and you're just probably going to lose points now, given what the market is at quarterback, right? Josh Allen, you can't really match Josh Allen's production with Mac Jones, Ryan Tannehill, and Zach Wilson. And I don't have a problem really in a vacuum with any of those 3 guys. I have my late round quarterbacks I like, and we all do, but you can't match Lamar, Josh Allen, Mahomes, etc. with those late round guys. It just, it's nothing. It's not a knock on those guys. It's just kind of how they score points. This is funny. Tony said Zach Wilson was why he made the finals, and it can be. Zach Wilson was a shit. He had a shit season, right? But sometimes just by the way scoring happens, this is obviously you won $975,000 more than Pete and I did. I think 25,000 was the 8th place prize in Best Ball Mania 2. But we had Dak and Mac Jones as our 2 quarterbacks. Not especially great. for their entire season. And we had tons of guys. We drafted CeeDee and Keenan Allen at the 2-3 turn. Not great picks. Kyle Pitts, not awesome. We had Jamar Chase. But like we drafted a bunch of dudes who are just like, Raheem Mostert, like not very good. But when it just all kind of comes together, obviously underselling Raheem Mostert, getting hurt in the first quarter of the first game, not very good. But like sometimes things all fall together, right? I mean, shit, Tony had Najee and Chubb, right? on your team. And now Najee was like good, but Najee didn't like blow the position out of the water, and Chubb certainly didn't. But just when things all kind of work together in concert with each other on a team, you know, that's just part of the game. We can't predict exactly how the scores are going to all fold together. And so that's like a little bit part of the difficulty of like the advance rate thing. Again, Pete and I's team, we lost Raheem Mostert in the first week. We got lucky with James Conner, and James Conner kind of helps carry us. We get a little Pollard here and there. We get Madison for a couple of weeks, and then Sony comes on, and then Penny comes on, and like it just kind of all happened to fall together, right? Connor kind of carries us to the close to the finish line, and then Sony and Devin Singletary and Penny and those guys take us across. You know, and it's like, if you look at the end of season ranks or whatever, Rashad Penny probably didn't even have a very good advance rate because he didn't do shit until the playoffs. You know, that type of thing. And so there's a little bit of that variance. But when you're focusing on those right kinds of players for the structure that you're building and just in general, that's how you win. No one would say that team that we built is like a foregoing advance rate. We took an elite tight end. Dak was a borderline elite quarterback. We had Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, Jamar Chase. And then we had a combination of running backs. Raheem Mostert, early season value, and on the 49ers who we liked. James Conner on a good offense, kind of some standalone value, and obviously had the contingent value. That's why he goes in the third round now this year. Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, who did I say? Rashad Penny, Devin Singletary, Sony Michel. You know, so it's like we didn't forego any sort of advance rate. We took 6 running backs, you know, but it also had the upside because the first thing, way before we even get into like kind of some of the specifics about the playoffs, is I wrote this a while back and I wanted to bring it up and talk about it again, is there are player types, archetypes of players and elements to how you construct that team that naturally just have more upside to them, right? So an example of a player who, you know, has risen a bunch, and I'm not saying that I'm right, wrong, whatever on this player, but I wasn't drafting Julio Jones. And there was a very strong chance, almost a lock, I guess you could say, that Julio would rise as soon as he signed somewhere. I knew that. I chose not to draft him, and I chose to draft basically like, A, I draft a lot of 0 running back teams, so I wasn't taking wide receivers in the 16th and 17th round. And B, I was targeting the Wan'Dale Robinsons, Alec Pierce, George Pickens, those types of players. Because Julio at his age, and with some of these other factors, as you see here, the 3 main kind of factors of the types of players I want to target as I construct my teams, he doesn't really fit into any of those. The contingent value thing is like, he wasn't on a team at the time, and so it's a little bit difficult to pinpoint if there is or isn't contingent value. Generally speaking, the 33-year-old guy is the guy who offers contingent value to his teammates, as opposed to being the guy who, you know, soaks up contingent value. However, he definitely didn't have the youth aspect going for him, right? We don't know if he had the contingent value. And then there also was really no correlation because he wasn't on a team. And just kind of all these different factors, he didn't fit into the type of player that I wanted to draft. Again, not saying that is right, wrong, indifferent, whatever. But that was kind of my approach. And this conversation that we're having here is like, why I think there are certain types of players, when I only get 150 bullets into Best Ball Mania 3, certain types of players that I'm targeting. So those big three things are youth, contingent value, and correlation. As the child in the room, ears perked up when we started talking about youth. Shout out to Bullock. So the first thing is that youthful element, right? There's a reason why last year, I don't want to comp these two because I don't think Julio is this level of dust at all. But there's a reason why last year, like, I wasn't drafting AJ Green, right? AJ Green wasn't even really on the board for me, even in Cardinals stacks, because look, he had the opportunity for even the contingent value and potential correlation. But because of his archetype of this old, declining, maybe even already fallen off the cliff wide receiver, there was just no element that would allow him to be just a total smash in best ball, right? Older players on average are seeing the production decline. It's one thing that I hate the Patriots, okay? I'm for anyone that doesn't know, if you're listening, you probably already do know I'm from St. Louis. You see a lot of the St. Louis stuff in the back, Cardinals, Blues, Darius Miles, etc. And I was a diehard St. Louis Rams fan, right? Greatest show on turf, Kurt Warner, Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, all these guys, that was my team, right? Even into the Steve Spagnuolo era and the Jeff Fisher era and all that. So the Patriots knocked the Rams off their pedestal, and I hated them for it. But the thing that, even more so than just like the general greatness of the Patriots, that I respected the most was the fact that Belichick and the whole team seemed to be out in front of this idea that we now should take into our best ball drafts, crazy as it sounds. They would get out ahead of the aging star, right? They traded Richard Seymour for a first-round pick. He was in his prime. He's all-pro, first-team all-pro, Pro Bowler, superstar, defensive lineman. They got rid of him knowing that we might get out from underneath this too early. He might still be a first-team all-pro player this year. But we know, because we understand what happens with aging players, it's just a matter of time before the production falls off the cliff. It could fall off the cliff this whole season, right? AJ Green just turned to dust 2 years ago, actually, on the Bengals. It was just over for AJ Green, right? You watched him, and my God, I felt terrible for, an absolute superstar wide receiver of my generation. And it just goes. No one can predict it, but it just happens. And so the Patriots were willing to trade these dudes in their primes because they knew that cliff was coming. And they were willing to say, look, if I'm wrong about it specifically happening right now, that's okay. I would rather get out early than hang on too long. And in general, the market of fantasy football hangs on too long because we're so tied to that past production, right? A guy who I'm actively fading this year, even though he is still probably a quite a good football player and is on an offense I love and I'm extremely excited for, is Keenan Allen. I love the Chargers. Justin Herbert is unreal. Staley is incredible. Very excited for the Chargers, just in general, not even just for fantasy. Defense looks good. O-line looks good. Everything. But Keenan Allen is this player. I don't know if it's going to be this year. I don't know if it's going to be the start of this year. But I know that the type of player that Keenan Allen is and the gradual decline he's already been having is the type of player that is A, prone to fall off that cliff at any moment, and B, prone to decline over the course of the season as opposed to ascend. Right? So Amon-Ra St. Brown had a couple things come, and we'll get to the contingent value because he's this perfect commodulation of all three of these things. Honestly, a lot of the guys who smashed last year were, so it's interesting. But Amon-Ra was the guy who was okay, just kind of out there, little bit of production here and there for the first, 8 to 10 weeks of the season. And then is the prototypical youthful rookie player who, as the season gets on, he gets more comfortable. I've never played at the NFL level. I don't know what it is specifically about the rookie thing that players get better over the course of the season, but it's basically been proven to happen for many years now. And Amon-Ra is ascending, and then boom, no more Hawkinson, no more Swift. Their receivers were already dust. And he has this perfect situation where he's coming on strong and he's got the contingent upside now because there's nobody else left on the offense. And so that was kind of the second pointer. Younger players on average have production improvements over the course of the season. So you have these kind of polarizing, polar ends, opposite ends, whatever the hell word I'm looking for. The opposite ends of the spectrum for the two types of players strictly because of this age thing. And you don't want to lump every single old player into, there's nuance to all this stuff. But generally speaking, like when deciding between the 12th round player who is second year player is 22 years old, 23 years old, maybe more unproven, and choosing between the 30-year-old guy who has a little bit, of past production, generally speaking, we want to side with that younger player, if just looking at that youth part. Then when we get to kind of this next step, you have the contingent value thing, which again, Amon-Ra benefited from, right? He, like I said, he was this perfect storm of all these different variables that just so happened to come together. And the contingent value thing generally is a little bit more at the running back position, right? It's much more kind of binary at running back where, right? So Chris Carson gets hurt, it's Rashad Penny time. He's the one getting the work. Darrell Henderson gets hurt, it's Sony Michel time. Cam Akers gets hurt, it's Darrell Henderson time. Obviously with Amon-Ra, he had Hawkinson go down, he had Swift go down, so he had this kind of perfect combination of both of those things. But even then, it's not just one or the other for him, right? It's not just contingent value that made him earn a 30+% target share. Like that's it. You have to earn that still. And he wouldn't have, not anyone would have earned that, right? Josh Reynolds didn't earn that. Josh Reynolds had contingent value at that point. Khalif Raymond had contingent value at that point, but Amon-Ra earned it. Right? And why? Because he's that young player that's ascending, going over the course of the young, talented player over the course of the entire season. Yeah. As Bullock says, rookies do not get a 30% target share no matter who is around them, let alone for 5 straight weeks. Dude's a baller, no matter what, pretty much. Let me see here. Yeah. I originally was kind of lazily, because I also saw that, Hawkinson was out, etc. I wasn't giving Amon-Ra, which is the sun god. That's what his name stands. His translation of Amon-Ra is sun god. I wasn't giving him quite enough credit when I very first started drafting, and I've rectified that. But so he kind of had this perfect storm again of contingent value and youth and everything. But then you also had Rashad Penny, who we'll combine all these things here in a second. You have Rashad Penny, who also does have youth, not quite to the level of Amon-Ra, but also has youth. And then running back having a little bit more clear-cut contingent value. Rashad Penny has talent and youth, and he just needed, former first-round pick, he just needed to stay healthy for once ever. Chris Carson goes down. Rashad Penny gets the, full early down role on Seattle. They also happen to have a nice playoff schedule, and boom, look what happens with Rashad Penny. As you see here on the screen, this was the fantasy playoffs last year, which is really funny when you go to look at. These are the points per game. I think half point PPR points per game in the fantasy playoffs. First, Rashad Penny, youth and contingent value. Second, Devin Singletary, youth and contingent value. And his contingent value was more Zach Moss couldn't hack it. Matt Breida couldn't hack it. So Devin Singletary just got the full, it was an ambiguous situation. It wasn't just an injury, although Zach Moss supposedly was still struggling with that ankle surgery he had in the offseason last year, which we're kind of just finding out now. But Singletary, contingent value, little bit of youth. Jonathan Taylor, just a superstar. Sony Michel, total contingent value. Wasn't even on the Rams. Wasn't even on the Rams to start camp. Gets traded when Cam Akers goes down. And then he gets the contingent value. A little less youth for him. Ironically, Justin Jackson on here, contingent value. Again, not as much youth. But you see like the top 10, top 15, right? Donta Foreman also not on the Titans to start the year. Rex Burkhead, contingencies, right? Also, I thought it was kind of funny that both A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones averaged 12.8 points per game. I mean, Duke Johnson, 12.2 points per game. Darrell Williams, 12 points per game. It's all contingencies. And so when we're maximizing for the playoffs, we're having this conversation about the playoffs, right? Why don't we focus in so much more on the contingencies? I'm not saying you can't draft J.D. McKissick or who's another kind of pass catching back. They're going by the wayside. R.I.P. James White career. They're going by the, and I do think Nyheim Hines has some contingent value, so I don't want to throw him quite in there. I think he would have some contingent value if something happened to Jonathan Taylor. But point being, this contingent value stuff is like crazy, right? And then again, I mean, even Fournette, who wasn't a smash in the playoffs, but if he had stayed healthy, would have been an absolute smash in the playoffs, right? Even here, I see, God bless James White, but there's nothing ambiguous about he can't do what Leonard Fournette and Devin Singletary did, where they just it's ambiguous and they just earn the job. That's a level of contingency that also exists in an ambiguous situation. And then, like I said, handcuffs, right, et cetera, et cetera. Hunter Renfrow is a really good football player, but also part of why Hunter Renfrow smashes Darren Waller getting hurt and Henry Ruggs going to fucking prison. So Amon-Ra, as you said, Amon-Ra, contingent value. So when you start to combine these things, it's like when I go through my drafts and I reach the point of, we haven't even gotten to like week 17 correlation and all that bullshit. If you just drafted off youth and contingent value, and then we're going to add in this correlation part, but if you just drafted off youth and contingent value, you could probably cover like all the upside stuff that you need. Obviously, you're missing quarterback, because quarterback doesn't really, quarterback has youth, but it's not the same thing. And then if you can bolt on the third bullet of correlation, is like kind of the holy grail combination of all these things. And correlation is multiple things. It is just strict inter-team correlation type stuff, right? One thing that didn't work last year, but one thing that I was doing, shout out to our guy who plays tonight, Darrington Evans, but I was actively like betting against Derrick Henry, which was clearly failing miserably and then clearly succeeded. Given the workload, age, etc. of Derrick Henry, I was making an active bet against him, and his backup was Darrington Evans. Darrington Evans was not the archetype of a player. He's much more like Nyheim Hines than he is like Alexander Madison, right? And so as a backup, as a handcuff. And so the bet was that if something were to happen to Derrick Henry, I can then take Darrington Evans, and it's like I can take AJ Brown or Julio Jones or Anthony Firkser, that type of deal, and I have a correlated bet from within that team. Something happens, I get multiple guys that benefit because Darrington's not just going to. I mean, Derrick Henry was getting some of the most ungodly touch totals of all time during that stretch, and Darrington Evans is just not going to get that. So what does that mean? Probably a little more passing. Now, Darrington also got hurt, and they turned to Donta Foreman, who was really good on the ground. But point being, there's correlated ways we can make bets within that. Darrington Evans, right? Young player, contingent value. Now let's tack something else on. Right now, give me AJ Brown, young, not really contingent value, but potential superstar. And we start to correlate those bets. You're obviously also correlating just in general within a team, right? Team stacks. Everybody pretty much knows about that type of a thing. I don't have to tell you that if trying to think, Devonta Smith takes a leap forward, right? If Devonta Smith, because he's a former freaking Heisman winner, first round pick, superstar prospect, takes a leap this year, that's pretty good for Jalen Hurts. So that's a natural, obvious correlation. Jalen Hurts also could take a leap, right? Correlating those kinds of, Tom Brady with X wide receiver is a little bit different, but when you can find that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, if Jamar Chase is a superstar, which, spoiler, he is and was, Jamar Chase is a superstar, Joe Burrow, also former number 1 overall pick. If those two things both happen to be right, the ceilings are correlated, even more than just a natural quarterback wide receiver tandem. I really like that with the Bills this year. Josh Allen, it's not like he can even really go to greater heights, but if Gabe takes a leap, if Isaiah McKenzie takes a leap, if Dawson Knox takes a leap, I mean, good Lord, man. The offense doesn't really need, any more firepower, but Jesus Christ. Also feel that way about the Chiefs this year. They've been relying upon Tyreek Hill for such a long time, and now you have Juju, Sky, MVS, not so much Hardman, but you have more weapons. Maybe none of them individually are Tyreek. I mean, none of them are individually Tyreek Hill. You have more weapons. If the culmination of those weapons combined with the best quarterback in the league, at least the best passing quarterback in the league, like the sky is the freaking the ceiling, through the roof is the ceiling. So you kind of have that. Then obviously, lastly, you have, correlating in the playoffs, right? Week 17. I walked through, this article is on the website. I believe it is called, maximizing, but it's under NFL. You can find maximizing playoff upside for tournaments. I won't bore you with all of the correlation thing, but I think there was, again, last year was a little bit of a perfect storm, but there's very, 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 very clear examples of why and how this correlation stuff works, and specifically why and how it works when you combine these types of players. It's not like AJ Green. Correlating AJ Green with, let me think about this. AJ Green with Zeke last year, right? They played in week 17 last year. Zeke was fine. I'm not even shitting on Zeke, but that doesn't check any of these boxes. Zeke definitely doesn't have contingent value. Not really young anymore, and at least his body isn't young anymore. And AJ Green doesn't check any of these boxes. So yes, they're correlated for week 17, but I still never want, I don't want that combination in my portfolio. On the flip side, CeeDee Lamb or Michael Gallup, who ironically Pete and I had both of those guys on our team, with James Conner or with Rondale Moore, that has all these variables, right? And that didn't come to fruition. But what we did see come to fruition, Amon-Ra and Rashad Penny. Amon-Ra was the absolute stone nut perfect storm of all these things. Rookie, talented player, also late round pick, getting the contingent value, and then you correlate him with another player doing the exact same thing. Rookie, young, not rookie, third or fourth year, whatever the fuck Rashad Penny is. Young player, Rashad Penny, talented, with contingent value behind Chris Carson. And then they play each other in week 17. And look what happens when that hits. You win $1 million. Right? You win $1 million when that hits. No one is saying we're predicting all of those things, but when you stack those things up, that's what ceiling it can provide. Right? The Seahawks just boat race the Detroit Lions. There was 70 points in that game. Was it 41-28? I think 69 points. Nice. Should have known. Yeah, we're struggling. Too many upside ceilings. Playoffs. All that. We're slipping over our words. But the Amon-Ra and Penny thing is just the absolute perfect example. On the flip side, you don't have the youthful factor, but you had Darrell Williams, who was actually the bring back. It wasn't a bring back against, Jamar Chase drops 50 in the fantasy finals, and it wasn't Tyreek, and it wasn't Travis Kelce, it wasn't Mecole Hardman, it wasn't CEH. It was Darrell Williams. Just take Darrell Williams in the last round, because when the Bengals are scoring so many points and scoring on such big plays, you're getting the Chiefs offense, and you have this again. Now Darrell's doesn't necessarily check that youthful box, but he absolutely checked that contingent value box. Something happens to CEH, you have the mentor out there scoring 25 fantasy points in the championship. So those are just some of the examples of the contingent value thing. But I think those 3 bullet points are like, we get lost in the playoff thing, and we've joked and, clickbaited people into the week 17 is all that matters and all that. But we sometimes lose a little bit of those. How do you get that? Like, okay, week 17 is all that matters. So the Davis Maddock joke from the Underdog show, right, about Zach Ertz and Tyler Algier is a great bit, and it's very funny. And if you missed it when Davis did a draft with them and just sent Josh and Hayden spiraling, rightfully so. Very funny. Must go watch it. But that's actually the thing we're kind of talking about here that's a little bit missing the mark. Zach Ertz doesn't fit any of this. Zach Ertz doesn't really have contingent value. Zach Ertz definitely doesn't have youth. He has the opposite. And so he had the correlation. Tyler Algier kind of has the youth and contingent value, but we're talking about a 5th round rookie on the Atlanta Falcons. And so just lumping them together and saying week 17 is a little bit missing the mark, because you kind of have to start here, right? You start with the youth contingent value. The archetype of a player has to be there first, as opposed to just, they play each other in week 17. Again, going back to the AJ Green example, like, I don't give a shit if AJ Green is playing a little, a peewee football team. I'm not drafting him in week 17. I don't care. He doesn't fit the type of player I want to put in my portfolio. And so that correlation stuff, he's never gonna factor in. He's never gonna be high enough up on my rankings to where he fits. I'm not gonna take him over Wan'Dale Robinson just because I have Kyle Pitts on that team. It's just not happening. And I don't think you should either. And so those are like the big things about the playoffs. I did write a little bit about some of the week 17 game stacks. Go check that out too. A couple of things of note is I specifically called out the 2 games that are probably 2 of the most popular games, as you see notable games left off the list. Now, they're not left off the list, but from a kind of prioritizing, truly prioritizing kind of game stacking these games. You have the Bills Bengals and the Rams Chargers. I'm actually going to start with the Rams Chargers. And the problem with the Rams Chargers is really just cost. I love all four of these offenses. I'm drafting players from all four of these teams. But the difference from even Jags Texans that you can get super cheap, right? Lawrence, Kirk, Nico Collins, Damian Pierce, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, etc. Those types of guys that you can get super cheap with. The Texans defense is going to stink again. Spoiler. Jags could actually be better, right? ETN, whatever. All those guys are available in that game for very affordable prices in a matchup that people are not necessarily prioritizing. The Cardinals and Falcons is actually like, it's not my favorite game, but when you factor in cost and what the market is kind of thinking about it, Cardinals Falcons, like I got a whole shitload of Hollywood Pitts combinations and Hollywood London and those types of things. Rondale London, right? Tons and tons of Kyler. But I don't think the market is appropriately assessing these two teams either, both offensively and defensively. I think the addition of Drake London, I think Marcus Mariota is better than people are giving them credit for. I just think that the second year in the offense for Kyle Pitts, etc., is all. The Falcons defense is going to stink. The Falcons defense is absolutely going to stink. And the low-key thing about this game, the Arizona defense, I think it's going to be worse. I think I'll give away some betting goods. I bet the Cardinals under 9 wins. I don't see like 6 wins for this Cardinals team. They got it. I mean, the Seahawks twice, and that's about it. I'm not really sure who this team's gonna beat. I don't think they can beat the Rams, and I don't think they can beat the 49ers. So I just don't know where the Cardinals are going to get wins, but that doesn't have anything to do with their offense. Kyler, Hollywood, when Nuke comes back, Ertz and McBride, Rondale in his second year, Connor. I think that the offense is going to be really good. I think the defense is going to be really terrible. And so super excited for that game. But again, you can see kind of how a lot of these things have those other elements to them, right? Hollywood is not super young, but you have Hollywood, maybe the back, Benjamin fits, right? Youth contingent value, and some correlation. Kyle Pitts obviously is like the epitome of this game. Drake London. So definitely prioritizing that one. And then we don't need to talk about too much about Broncos Chiefs, but it has absolutely everything. Both sides have youth, contingent value, obviously the correlation. And I've talked about this a lot. This would be a game that I would be targeting, period, point blank period, for every possible reason to target everyone on these offenses. Uncertainty, upside, youth. I mean, go down the list. Javonte, Judy, Sutton, Alberto, KJ Hamler, Greg Dulcich, and then Melvin Gordon doesn't have the youth, but he has the contingent value. And on the Chiefs, we talked about the Chiefs a little bit. And so you have like the Bills, Bengals, Rams, Chargers that are just a little bit more expensive. And I also think people are underselling the quality of these defenses a little bit. And then, Cincinnati, they're underselling a little bit of, the weather that they might experience there. Not a ton. Like I said, I mean, Gabe Davis is my highest owned player, so I'm certainly not fading these guys. I'm absolutely not fading Chase and Higgins, and I have a lot of McKenzie, etc. But I'm not going out of my way quite as much. Like, I think this game was like the headline game everybody was mentioning when it first came out, and the Bills had the number 1 DVOA defense last year, and the Bengals were not a bad defense. I think the Rams defense is going to be good again, and I think the Chargers defense looks like it's going to be pretty good this year. So I think offense rules the world. Offense is really what drives the scoring more than just defense, right? Good offense beats good defense. But I do think just from a playoff upside perspective that these games are just a smidge overhyped, right? I'm not avoiding them. Again, Gabe Davis is my highest owned player. I'm definitely drafting Cooper Kupp, Mike Williams, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, etc. But when I'm like really trying to hone in, like say there's a tournament, I walked through my Millie Maker teams on DraftKings, when I'm really trying to hone in a little bit more on one of maybe these crazy big field tournaments where I want to make sure I hit my combinations of players from games, I am prioritizing a little bit more of some of these other games just to make sure I'm hitting everything about them. And it's a combination again of some of the game environment type stuff, but also those three critical elements: youth, contingent value, and then correlation. And then I was just going to pull up, there's from the contingency thing, I just recently wrote this where I kind of talked about, again, week 17 is all that matters and contingencies are all that matters. What everything is all that matters? I don't know. But I walked through in more detail kind of how the contingency stuff works. And I think youth is still, to me, that first pillar when we start to talk through playoff upside and just general upside over the course of the entire season. But the contingency stuff is like when you can get the youth with the contingency, I think is like those are the players that I want to take big stands on. Right. I'm not saying Kyle Pitts has big contingent value. I see Bullock talking about his Kyle Pitts love, like I also have. I'm not saying, but you lose Drake London or something like that, and Kyle Pitts, it's all they got. It's got Kyle Pitts in the passing game. So you get this young absolute superstar who gets the contingent value as well. Or on the flip side, there's Drake London, his teammate, right? Youth, first wide receiver taken in the draft, young, already has opportunity. If there's some kind of contingent value upside from him, boom. And then, the running back stuff is the big one, right? That's kind of where, zero RB drafters, hero RB drafters make their hay. How do I find Rashad Penny and Devin Singletary and James Conner and Leonard Fournette, Sony Michel, those guys, right? Well, it's a lot of the times it is your kind of handcuff or, ambiguous running back situation, like you see here. And then there are some kind of other little minor things like Mark Andrews is my favorite one, like from an offensive identity change. You can see teams, the Ravens are actually why I'm not targeting Andrews really this year at all. He's a superstar. He might be the best receiving tight end in the NFL already, him, Pitts, Kelsey, whatever. But the Ravens made a huge offensive identity shift last year out of necessity. They went from throwing the ball 400 times to Mark Andrews running 600 routes. They didn't even throw, the leap was so absurd and it didn't work. But they had to do it because their running backs all got hurt, their offensive line got hurt, and their defense, they were playing like XFL corners and safeties. Because, they just suffered so many injuries. Go look back when you have a minute and look at what happened to their pass defense, like the final 6 to 8 games or whatever. But that's when Andrews smashed. And, if they are going to throw 650 times, Andrews is probably going to smash. But I don't want to pay a mid-second round price personally to hope that this team who has shown us that they want to go back to the run will stick to this crazy high pass rate, which just doesn't pass the smell test. But it's an example of those kind of things that can happen, right? I bet on it hopefully happening with Derrick Henry. It didn't work out. But the Andrews thing is a perfect example of something that can break that way, where an offense shifts their identity, and that's a contingency that can play out, right? It's a weird one. It's not like an injury. It's not like you earned something. It's just like your situation like just went to shit, or just the coach, something changed about your situation. And so then the last thing I was going to do is pull up my like playoff kind of exposure. So I'm up to, I thought I sent I think I have 92 teams in BBM. Let me refresh real quick. So I think I have 92. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So I have 92 BBM teams drafted now, just Slow and steady wins the race, working my way up to 150. And if I go to my exposures and we go down to the playoff stuff, we can look kind of at just the top couple here for just a minute. And before I do that, I'm gonna hit some of these questions, comments. I apologize for skipping over them. They had a lot to cover. Let's see. This is definitely true. Blows my mind that people still draft AJ Green. Jason says, I feel like Keenan's archetype isn't great for best ball anyway. Keenan Allen isn't great for best ball anyway, especially when you can usually take Mike Williams instead, even without all the other factors. I totally agree. Nailed it. Nothing more from me. I definitely have Nez says there's just so many studs around Amon-Ra. It's hard to get him. That is, I definitely don't have a problem with that. I actually don't know how much on Best Ball Mania. I really don't think I have much. It's so 9% Amon-Ra. So like at the field basically is what I have of Amon-Ra. So I feel similarly. Johnny says something happens to AJ Brown and Devonta Smith is a smash. Yep, 100. MVS is just a taller Tyreek. God, I hope so. As you see over here as I sit with 34% MVS in Best Ball Mania. Let's see here. What if Flacco is this year's Kurt Warner? I mean, I have a lot of Jets. When I look at my Jets, 7% Michael Carter, 18% Elijah Moore, 11% Tyler Conklin, 11% Garrett Wilson, 10% Zach Wilson, and 7% Corey Davis. No Brees for me. But I would be cool with Joe Flacco turning into Kurt Warner, given my exposures. Let's see. Another Arizona Atlanta person. CJ's starting to force Amon-Ra. And then Omar says 50% Godwin is preventing me from getting any Sun God. I think that might work itself out for you. I think, Godwin, you might get a little bit of steam one way or the other. I think they might end up Godwin's back, just getting more and more work in practice. I think Godwin's going to get pushed up a little bit. So we can see, I haven't specifically planned this out and looked through this, but we can see some of the pairings that you'll notice. I want to do Arizona and Atlanta first, right? Just like I said, my main pairing, look at here. There's a perfect example. Hollywood is not crazy young, but you have this youthful who's Hollywood's this weird thing where he has the contingent value to start the year. He's hard to explain. He's just a guy I'm really high on. I think he's just a perfect fit with Kyler. But you see with Hollywood and Pitts, Hollywood and London, and then Pitts and Rondale, and then obviously Kyler with London on the other side, Kyler with Pitts on the other side. What do we got? Kyler, Hollywood, and Pitts. A little bit of Marcus Mariota we've mixed in. But you kind of see where we start to you put Kyle Pitts together with Hollywood in the playoffs, and that's what we're looking for. I did want to look at also at Denver, Kansas City. Here's Denver, Kansas City is probably the best example of all of this. Every single possible pairing you could have with these guys is covers all of this stuff. MVS doesn't really, MVS, Melvin, and Kelsey don't really have the youth, but they absolutely have the the offensive situation, maybe the projection ranking, and they 100% all have the contingent upside. So it's just this, again, perfect storm of all these players in this game, and you can see Javonte and Sky. I can't think of a better combination of those things. If you were to get Javonte becoming 2 years ago JT down the stretch, and Sky Moore becoming the guy who we're taking in the second round next year because he's the breakout Chiefs wide receiver. I can't think of a more perfect pairing. I take MVS a lot. Obviously, MVS does have the contingent value in my opinion, but he also is He was really, really cheap when we first started, and he definitely has contingent value too. Something happens to one of these other guys, somebody's got to get targets. R.I.P. Rojo. R.I.P. Rojo and Alberto, another good one. KJ Hamler, Judy, definitely. So you can see a little bit of the kind of playoff combinations. I was gonna try to see. Let's look at one of the groups. Here we go. Chicago and Detroit. Here, you want to? I'll be honest with you. I don't remember even drafting any of this, but Jamal Williams is definitely not what I would call youth. But this one is kind of funny. We got two Jamison Williams, Velus Jones teams. There you go. Late round, superstar first round pick coming off the ACL, Jamison Williams, and then the last round, Velus Jones to go with them. It's like, give me the youth, give me the contingent value, even though the team sucks. Pair those guys up, all good. There's not a ton of contingent value. Velus has it. There's not a ton of contingent value on the Bears, but they are a kind of a funny one. Another good one. Jameer White, Brandon Ayuk, right? There's a pairing that is like definite youth, definite contingent value. Another kind of Ayuk, Jameer. I don't really like the 49ers matchup necessarily, but you have if Jameer was having an end of season ascension, and Brandon Ayuk was having an end of season ascension, and maybe Debo or Kittle goes down, like that's another one you can totally see. Great, excellent point. Velus is quite old, but I like drafting Velus because people have totally written him off. Speaking of the Devonta Smith, yeah, here we go, another perfect one, right? All the guys in this game, Devonta Smith and Chris Olave. Perfect example. God forbid Jarvis Landry breaks down and Michael Thomas' ankle still isn't right, and A.J. Brown gets dinged up again because, A.J. Brown, that's what he does. Pair those guys up together. That's kind of going back to the very original thing. Would anyone tell you? So even like just looking generally at my exposures, right? I know some people don't like Gabe and some people don't like MVS, but would anyone say Darrell Henderson is you can't like Darrell Henderson? Like, I'm trying to advance. I can't take Darrell Henderson. Like, nobody thinks Darrell Henderson or Kyle Pitts or these guys are hurting your advance rates, right? And I'm not drafting structure. Like, 32% of my or 35% of my teams are 2-6-8-2, 2-7-7-2, 2-6-7-3, right? These are like all my teams are not crazy constructions, but it's the way I construct the players and the player archetypes together that is what then turns it into a playoff upside type team, right? As you obviously see, 67% zero and hero running back over here. So taking 68% elite quarterbacks, 55% elite tight ends, and then 70%, of anti-fragile structures, hero and zero running back, and building them in these constructions, I'm not foregoing advance rate at all. But I am prioritizing the archetypes that we talked about today, and then the correlations and such. Tony said Houston. So my problem for Jacksonville and Houston, you see, I only have 6 of those. Is that of course it is Nico and Zay. Team we drafted had Nico and Zay. I'm excited about that. I am also excited about that. Nico got steamed up so damn high that I haven't gotten very much of him anymore. But you kind of see Zay doesn't have super youth on his side either. I guess neither does Christian Kirk. But that's a game I like. Definitely contingent value and just general value on those guys. It's just been difficult for me to get to as much of that game as I really wanted to. But I'm kind of glad you pointed it out because I want to get to some more. I'm not a Brandon Cooks guy, but I do want to get to some more of that game. anyway, those were some examples kind of how I've put into practice some of those pairings from within the constructs of this year's playoffs. And hopefully the discussion around kind of a lot of those archetypes and how we can maybe find those archetypes and fit them together and use that to maximize the playoffs and strategize around that in our drafts. Hopefully that was helpful. It was honestly helpful for me. I kind of joke about that all the time, but I'm not really joking that when we get on and have these strategy talks, it's like helping me work my way through these different concepts and all that. And I feel, better about everything when I am done talking about it. So really it's just selfish. You guys just get to hear me figure out my strategy as we go. Tomorrow, special presentation of the Friday Draft Club. Rob Coakley at King Coakley, my coworker, is bringing on the one and only, the guy everybody loves, Peter Overzet, Ship Chasing, My Fantasy Life, all the Club Top Shot, Splash Play, right? Everything that Pete does, you guys know him. They will be coming on tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern to draft a big dog team on Underdog. So Rob and Pete be live here tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern to draft a big dog team. So make sure you come check that out. If you have not subscribed to the Spike Week premium tools like Draft IQ was pulling up there, like the overlays that you can use when you're draft, I really do highly recommend it. There's a link down in the description. So for me and for these dogs and for Rob and Pete tomorrow, they will see you guys later. I will see you guys very soon. Have a good weekend if I don't talk to you later. Peace.